Welcome to Pleasureology Island. I'm Free Thought Steve. Thanks for stopping by. Continuing with my series of talks about Ganjadelic pleasure science and how it can help us learn to relax emotionally, feel better physically, and ultimately lead to cosmic orgasms, full brain, 100% orgasms. And after you've had that orgasm, you realize that your brain and your pleasure system could not possibly be capable of creating a more powerful orgasm than you've just had. And you feel completely satisfied sexually. And so this is an educational program designed to help you learn how to do that for yourself. My topic today is called Solving Reich's Therapeutic Impasse, Dissolving Emotional Armor with Ganjadelic Body-Mind Relaxation. And as I've mentioned, I've tried to cram as much information as possible into the 100 characters permitted for a YouTube video title. So I'll unpack this title for you and explain what it is that I'm going to be talking about. Solving Reich's Therapeutic Impasse, referring to Wilhelm Reich, the Jewish psychoanalyst from Austria, who eventually came to the United States, who was the first one to observe the condition of emotional chronic tension that Reich, R-E-I-C-H, called body armor and character armor. And he felt that the two of them went together. He felt that the emotional armoring was in some way what he called functionally identical with the physical muscular armoring in the body. He felt that they all were functionally identical, meaning that when the function of the emotions changed, then the function of the body was affected. When the emotions got more tense, the body was more tense as well, that they were somehow connected. But he didn't know how they were connected. He was just guessing, because in his day, in the 1920s and 30s and 40s, very little was known about neuroscience. They didn't even suspect the existence of the emotional brain as such, which today we know so much about. And that's why I've spent the last 40 years studying neuroscience in order to be able to explain what it was that caused this armoring that Wilhelm Reich observed in his patients, that he felt was preventing them from having satisfying orgasms. He felt that their orgasms were constricted by the fact that their bodies were tense and did not relax into the orgasm reflex when the orgasm reflex was triggered. They kept their bodies tense and their emotions were tense, and this combination prevented them from discharging the full amount of sexual desire energy that their innate biological sex drive had generated. The sex drive generates a certain amount of energy. The energy is meant to be discharged in orgasm. That's the way we satisfy the sex drive, is through discharging our sexual drive energy through the orgasm reflex. And the more powerful an orgasm reflex you have, the more completely we are able to satisfy our sexual drive. And so the cosmic orgasm is being able to satisfy the sexual drive 100%, because we've had the most powerful orgasm that our own pleasure system is capable of generating. So, solving Reich's therapeutic impasse. Wilhelm Reich came to an impasse because he had identified this chronic organismic tension. He could see it in his patients, and he believed that it was constricting their orgasms, and so he made it his therapeutic goal to break down this armoring, release his patients from this chronic tension in order that their orgasms could get bigger and more powerful. So he was the first psychotherapist ever to have the explicit therapeutic goal of increasing the power and pleasure of his clients' orgasms. Nobody had ever dared to do anything like that beforehand, and he was pretty much ostracized for doing that within the psychological community. And he was even persecuted by the government, mostly because he was so sex positive and he was trying to help people satisfy their sex drives better, which in the 1930s and 40s, when Christianity was still the dominant culture, the dominant worldview in the culture, and Christianity was saying, don't talk about sex, don't mention sex, pretend that sex doesn't even exist. It's nasty to even talk about sex. And here's Wilhelm Reich trying to help people have better orgasms and more powerful and pleasurable orgasms. It was about the most radical thing you could do in those days. All right, so solving Reich's therapeutic impasse. What was this therapeutic impasse? It was the problem Reich had. He had diagnosed the illness or the chronic problem in his clients. He had diagnosed the problem, but he hadn't been able to cure it. He didn't know how to undo this armor. He knew that his goal was to break down the emotional armoring and the muscular armoring in the body, but he didn't really know how to do it. And he went about it quite aggressively in some ways. He was just guessing, and it wasn't his fault, because he didn't know about the emotional brain. He didn't realize that this chronic organismic tension was coming from the emotional brain, and therefore the way to eliminate this emotional tension was to get the brain, the emotional brain, to calm down, quit being so anxious, quit being so guilty, quit being so fearful, quit being so angry, and just be calm so that it wasn't sending out that tension energy from the emotional brain into the body. So Reich was trying to work from the outside in, and I read a book describing Orthodox Reichian therapy, where it was written by the actor Orson Bean, B-E-A-N, Orson Bean, who wrote a book called Me and the Orgone. And that was about his experience with Reichian therapy in New York City, and I think in the late 50s or early 60s, 1950s and 1960s. I think the book came out around 1970. It was just about the time I was ready to read it. I had first read about Reich in 1970, late 71, early 72. So I then got this book actually describing Reichian therapy, which seemed to consist of the therapist pressing into the tense muscles of a person's body in order to force those muscles to relax, and by creating as much pain as possible to force the person to express their emotions uninhibitedly, to cry out and scream and surrender to their emotions instead of keeping their emotions inhibited. And that was the therapeutic approach that Reich took. Was he wanted to get emotional catharsis that I was talking about last time, this purification of emotional energy, which is a really beneficial thing. He was trying to trigger it, though, by forcing those muscles to relax, and he felt that it was the tension in the muscles that was causing the emotional inhibition. And if he could break down that muscular tension, the emotions would burst forth spontaneously. And it was a therapeutic technique that really didn't apparently work. I've never heard of anybody who actually had significantly stronger orgasms as a result of Reichian Orthodox therapy. There may have been, but I haven't read of any such reports. Because what you really want to do, and Reich didn't realize this, what he really wanted to do was relax the emotional brain. And when you painfully put somebody through an unpleasant experience like that, that doesn't relax the emotional brain, that tenses it up. And Reich's mistake was he was trying to forcibly break down the armor. He was trying to break down this forcible armor with forcible therapy of sorts. And so Orthodox Reichian therapy didn't work that well. And then later on, some of Reich's students developed Neo-Reichian therapy, which was more effective because they realized, okay, they just want to get people expressing their emotions. So the therapy had two parts. There was first putting people in a stressful posture, like making them bend over and hang there for a long time until their legs got so tired and so forth that they were really weak. And this was supposed to ramp up their emotional energy. And once these stress positions had generated a certain amount of emotional energy in the person, then the person would lie down on a mattress or a mat and would start to have like a tantrum, a baby's tantrum, kicking with the heels, pounding with the fists, and breathing very deeply and making noises, kind of a thing, until eventually you would get into your anger and you'd start pounding and yelling and screaming and going on. And then after that, you might start crying and so forth and have some emotional catharsis. And so that kind of Neo-Reichian therapy was a little better. It was moving in the right direction towards doing emotional catharsis by just getting the emotional system worked up and then having the person pretend that they're a baby, kicking their feet and kicking their heels and pounding their fists and stuff. And so there was some good emotional catharsis that could go on in Reichian therapy. I'm not sure if they used Bataka battles. I didn't ever get to participate in the Bataka battle when I did about a week's worth of Neo-Reichian therapy, and that wasn't part of it. It was mostly just lying on my back, kicking and screaming, and that didn't really create much catharsis for me because I had already gone through my catharsis period, which I'll tell you about eventually, doing theater, because I believe that the emotional brain responds to situations, particularly social situations of one sort or another, and you've kind of got to create an imaginary situation that you're interacting with somebody else with, and everybody's pretending that this situation is real, and this may allow you to get in touch with your emotions and express them uninhibitedly. And I'll tell you how I did that in an experimental play later on. So Reich had this, what I call a therapeutic impasse. He really hadn't found a successful therapy, because even the Neo-Reichian therapy, they have basically given up on the idea of helping people have bigger orgasms. They didn't mention orgasms once during the week that I did an intensive seminar week of Neo-Reichian therapy, and orgasm was not really mentioned that I recall. They were just concentrating on getting people emotionally freed up, liberating people's emotions from their inhibitions, which is a laudable goal in itself. But then even once you've expressed a lot of emotions, then that doesn't actually necessarily make you a happier person as you go on through your life every day. You don't necessarily feel that much better. The catharsis, the cleansing is really good, and you feel much better after that. But then your old tensions start to come back. You really haven't undone the tensions throughout your body, because that takes actually muscle stretching exercises. Day after day after day, the kind of thing we do in yoga and qigong, muscle stretching exercises, excuse me. And that's what's one thing that's necessary to unlearn the habit of having tense muscles. And then you also have to retrain your emotional brain to get it out of the habit of operating in tension and anger and fear, anxiety, urgency. The urgency mode of operating our emotional brain is what we have to unlearn. We have emotional cleansing by expressing our pent-up emotions as strongly as we can, but then after that, we need to learn how to let our emotional brain calm down and just relax, and practice relaxing and getting our consciousness nice and stable. And then once we have achieved a stable, relaxed consciousness and a relaxed body, then this is the time we can learn how to become sexually aroused in a slow and gradual way, little by little, surge after surge of sexual arousal, allowing that to fill our consciousness without triggering the orgasm reflex, by allowing that bliss energy to flow out in all directions, clearing our mind of thoughts and relaxing our body, paying attention. But as soon as we feel a surge of sexual arousal energy rush up into our consciousness, then we relax at that moment. We stop all physical pleasure. We stop all thoughts. We stop all activity that would be emotionally exciting, because we don't want to excite the emotional brain any further once we feel that surge of emotional sexual energy in coming up into consciousness, because that's when it's likely to trigger an orgasm, and the orgasm won't be as powerful as it would be if we allow our whole consciousness to be filled with this bliss of pre-orgasmic sexual energy. And we'd allow that to happen multiple times. And then finally, when our whole brain is filled with that golden cloud, basically, of sexual bliss energy, then when we trigger the orgasm reflex, the contraction of the muscles in the pelvis will send volleys of nerve impulses surging up into our brain. And each one of those waves of nerve impulses will combine with the emotional energy that's already there, that bliss cloud, and our whole brain will feel a series of tidal waves of orgasmic pleasure, the cosmic orgasm. Solving Reich's therapeutic impasse, dissolving emotional armor with Ganjadelic body-mind relaxation. Okay. Using cannabis in a psychedelic way, Ganjadelic, body-mind relaxation, relaxing our mind, relaxing our body, relaxing our emotions. Sort of, you could call it organismic relaxation, which is facilitated and made easier. The organismic relaxation, I'm getting too relaxed. The organismic relaxation that we want to bring about is assisted by cannabis. And it makes us able to relax the muscles in our body much better. It enables us to be aware of when sexual urges, sexual surges of energy are flowing up into consciousness. It makes us aware of whether we are thinking thoughts or not. Particularly if we have learned to practice Zen meditation so that we are observing our own consciousness. We know how to observe our own consciousness and see what's going on inside our own consciousness. That's what enables us to be aware of our level of sexual arousal at the moment that arousal energy surges into consciousness and creates more bliss. And that allows us, being aware of that surge the moment that it happens, allows us then to clear our mind of thoughts, clear the thought fog out of our minds, and to simply relax and let that cloud of golden bliss dissipate and be processed by our brain until it subsides. And then it's safe to resume pleasurable activity and emotionally exciting fantasies or emotionally exciting activities. It's safe to do that again until we feel that next surge of emotional arousal energy flow up into consciousness, and we let it expand out. We visualize consciousness having no boundaries in all directions, and we let the energy flow out in all directions and just dissipate into the universe until it subsides down and it's safe to resume sexual activity again. And this is a way for men to learn advanced ejaculatory control so that they can make love to their partners all night long if they want, and give their partners multiple orgasms if the partners are capable of having multiple orgasms. Then this becomes really truly amazing sex, epic sex. It can go on all night long, and you just want to make sure that you don't have any neighbors in near vicinity that you'll keep awake all night long. I once kept an entire dorm full of women awake at the college I was attending all night long, I didn't even think about it until the next day. And anyway, I was lucky I didn't get thrown out of school for that. All right, where was I? Okay, so the answer to Reich's therapeutic dilemma is that yes, catharsis is important, but relaxation is equally important. And doing relaxation practice, voluntary relaxation practice, is very good because what happened, I'll tell you how I first learned the physical loosening up exercises that will gradually loosen up our body armor, that this chronic tension in our muscles that has built up over the years that we're not even aware of. Doing these relaxation exercises day after day will gradually loosen up the body armor that is helping us keep our emotions inhibited. I was at a summer drama workshop that lasted 6 weeks, 8 weeks, I can't remember exactly. And our teachers were a bunch of hippies like us. This was the summer of 1972. And our teachers were into experimental theater, which is crazy stuff. I mean, anything goes, right? And it was breaking away from scripts and anything else. It was just like being spontaneous and expressing something and creating something interesting. So our teachers at this drama workshop would take us through, at the beginning of every class, they would take us through a bunch of warm-ups, a bunch of physical warm-up movements, things like shoulder rolls, and neck rolls, and, a lot of deep breathing and movement of the arms, all kinds of fun stuff that was totally different from any way that I had ever exercised before. The calisthenics that I learned in high school at PE, were designed to make us more armored, to tense up our muscles and make us capable of going out and fighting the commies wherever they happened to needed to be fought. So our PE exercises were militaristic exercises, and these were just the opposite. These were hippie exercises. This is like peace, love, and feeling good exercises. And so there were lots of these wonderful breathing and movement, and you also did some sound, a lot of, making noise, even if it didn't contain words, which was really good. This is actually one of the best ways to release emotions, is to simply make noises without any words. So I think actually a real good emotional release exercise, if you get a tenderness together, a therapeutic tenderness of people who want to learn how to be more emotionally tender, more emotionally open and spontaneous and real with each other and kind and affectionate, would be to do a chimpanzee skit. Everybody's chimpanzees, and they can hop around and move like chimpanzees and make noises like chimpanzees, only making whatever noises fit the mood that they want to express. If they want to get angry, they can make angry chimpanzee noises. They don't have to be chimpanzee noises. They're actually human noises expressing emotions the way chimpanzees do when they get emotionally upset. And hopping around and just doing this, and then you can and then being affectionate and friendly and all kinds of different things. I think theater is theater of catharsis, theater of emotional cleansing is the best way for us to learn how to be emotionally uninhibited, so that then when situations arouse emotional energy in our daily lives, we know how to release that energy in a therapeutic way that doesn't offend other people, but just a sigh. We'll be able, when something stresses us up, just get rid of that energy vocally. Very, very powerful technique, very simple. So anyway, Back to my summer drama workshop, after doing these exercises for 3 or 4 weeks or so, we were back up in the mountains, in the Sierra Mountains, far away from civilization, an hour or two drive away from the Central California Valley, where a lot of the students lived. But we were back up there, and we were specifically told on the first day of the camp directors, who themselves were aging hippies, but nevertheless were also drama professors at the local community college, and they'd been getting a lot of flack from the administration about how many drugs had been being used up there in this beautiful location in the middle of the woods, in the middle of the Sierra Nevada mountains, where you could walk out to this lake and up the river valley and climb some cliffs up there and get up to a series of pools and waterfalls up above Cleopatra's Baths. They were just the most gorgeous place you'd ever been. So people had been having a wonderful time. And, for most of them in previous years of the drama workshop, it was just an excuse to spend 6 weeks in the Sierras for like $200. It was just dirt cheap. Because that included room and board and everything, your place to stay and 3 meals a day, and the drama workshop, and the tuition was nothing because it was a community college class. So this was a great opportunity, really, to spend 6 weeks in the Sierras, and if you could get high out in nature, you'd have these sublime experiences, and people were doing that, and it was a wonderful thing. But unfortunately, the school administration got flack about it. The word got back to them, and they told the professors, okay, no more drugs, or we cancel the workshop from now on. No more summer Pinecrest drama workshops. Forget it. Well, so we got this stern lecture on the first day of the camp. Don't use drugs at all. No drug using, or everything shuts down, or whatever. I don't know. So we were all straight for at least 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. And we were doing these muscle loosening up exercises every day, and some, shouting, moving around, and getting emotionally uninhibited. And finally, one of the students, who was a bit of a rebel, even more than I, he said, well, fuck this shit about not getting high. The weekend is coming up. We're going to have 2 days off from classes. I'm going down to the valley and score some weed or hash or whatever and come back. So he scored some really good hash. He drove down to his hometown, scored some great hash, drove back up to the camp, started selling it to everybody. And so, we got high, and that night, I got so high on that hash, I couldn't even get out of the bunk bed that I was staying in. I'd had to stay in the little cabin, and say, oh, forget it, I'm not going to practice, I'm not going to rehearse the play this afternoon because I just can't move. And I just lay there, just totally stoned. And so finally that night, or that afternoon late, I went over to the main lodge to see what was going on. I got kind of lonely. Went over to the main lodge, and there's our young drama teacher. He was in his 30s, late 30s at the time, I suppose, but he looked younger than that. And he was a hippie with hair down to his waist, and a really cool guy. And he'd been teaching us all these loosening up exercises, And now I find him sitting in the middle of the floor of the main lodge, a wooden floor, and he's sitting on this nice polished wooden floor. And this is the big house where all the girls had to stay. The guys stayed out in little separate cabins in the woods, kind of, and the girls all stayed, in the main lodge so that their sex lives could be supervised. And here was Paul sitting in the middle of the floor, and there was a girl talking to him, sitting on the floor in front of him, talking to him, and she was crying as she talked. She was just sobbing, crying as she talked. And behind her, there was a line of girls sitting on the floor, and they were all crying, or at least most of them were crying. And I just said, what is going on here? And Paul, he was amazing. He'd actually spent some time in a mental institution a few months earlier because he'd had gone through his own existential crisis of, just saying, this world is so crazy. What the hell am I doing? But he'd come through it. And so he had enough psychological background, even though he was mainly a drama teacher. He knew how to just sit there and listen and let these girls pour their heart out to them. They were telling him all about the tragedies of their adolescent years, their teenage years, or their childhood years. All the sad things in their lives were suddenly coming pouring out of them. And he was listening to them and allowing them to have catharsis. It was just the kind of thing that Wilhelm Reich would have approved of, that these girls were able to feel their feelings and let them out. And so I didn't understand it at the time, but later on I realized what was going on here. We had been doing these exercises for a month and loosening up our muscles and loosening up our body armor. And then all these girls had gotten high on this hash that the guy had brought back from the valley. And the cannabis had energized their emotional brain. Cannabis energizes the dopamine circuits that are the main circuits flowing through the emotional brain. And so the emotional energy overwhelmed the body armor, the loosened up body armor. The loosening of the muscles allowed the emotions to flow out of these girls more effortlessly, particularly when they were energized by cannabis. And of course, the cannabis also further relaxes us, relaxes our muscles and relaxes our emotional brain. So the emotional brain no longer was capable of inhibiting its own feelings, and those feelings just started flowing out of these girls. And I continued, after the drama workshop was over, I went back to my college and participated in another experimental drama play, a play called Tom Paine, about Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense during the American Revolution. And he had a rather tumultuous life, and his life was just used as a framework for presenting like the universal, every person's life, starting out with suffering and painful birth, and then through all the crises of life, anger, righteous anger, and then fear, being chased through the woods, and then being trapped in a prison cell and facing execution, and then finally coming to old age, coming back to America and being actually ignored and reviled, because he went to help for the French Revolution after he helped the American Revolution. And Thomas Paine wrote a book called The Rights of Man, defending the French Revolution against Edmund Burke, the British conservative who was attacking the French Revolution. So anyway, this play was about Tom Paine and all the disturbance in his life, and there was a lot of group running around shouting and screaming even. At one point we did a battle scene where we started off on one side of the stage, and each of the actors represented a cannon firing at the other side. And so we would fire ourselves, and then we'd run across the stage and then fall to the ground on the opposite side of the stage and transform ourselves into the wounded victims of that cannon fire that we had just shot off. So we were the people who fired the shot, and we were the people who were the victims of it. And we, lay on the ground and yelled and screamed and so forth. Talk about emotional release work. This was great stuff, for emotional release work. And there was another time where Tom was supposed to be running through the forest and being chased by soldiers and their dogs. The dogs were trailing him. through there. And so I became one of the dogs, and I leaped up and started, acting like a crazy dog about to tear Tom Paine to pieces. And this was a piece of a spontaneous theater on my part. It wasn't rehearsed and nobody ordered me to do it, but it suddenly occurred to me that that's what we should all be doing in this scene where where Tom is supposed to be being chased by dogs. We should all be the dogs, chasing him and trying to, threatening to tear him apart, So when I got that inspiration, I acted on it immediately. I was the only one who did. Fortunately, it was a rehearsal. There was no audience there. But I was down there on all fours, snarling at him like a rabid animal, a wolf about to tear him to pieces. And he was literally scared shitless. The guy who was playing Tom thought I had totally lost it, and he was afraid I really was going to tear him to pieces. You should have seen the look on his face. He was like, oh, what the hell is going on? Yeah, because some friends and I had gotten high just before I went over to the rehearsal that night, and all my friends got to stay back there and listen to music, and I went off to rehearsal and had all these wonderful insights about how we could make this play more fascinating. But it just kind of freaked out the rest of the company. But if everybody had been on board, see, the rule in improvisational theater is you're supposed to support whatever anybody does. If anybody comes up with an inspiration and starts to act it out, you're supposed to go along with it. You're supposed to help it happen. But the rest of the members of the cast hadn't been given any instructions by the director to do that. And none of them had the initiative and spontaneity to decide to do it all on their own, because they didn't know what Doug, the director, would think about that. They were still too inhibited by authority. So that's why I say you got to be a happiness radical to go through this whole Ganjadelic body pleasure science thing that I'm talking about. Is you got to be willing to ignore the conventions, not worry about what other people think, and just do whatever it takes to be happy, including being really emotionally spontaneous and cutting loose emotionally and letting go. So I did a lot of emotional release work in the rehearsals and the performances of that play. And so there was only one further thing I needed to do in order to complete my catharsis work. And this is why I'm saying that theater is a good way to bring about emotional catharsis, much better than just lying on their back, kicking and pounding your fists and stuff. No, create an actual scene that has some drama in it, where there's interaction between the people, and you really can let go of those emotions. Another one actually from anthropology, from the island of Bali, I think, somewhere in Indonesia, they do this monkey dance or something, where there's an evil monkey king who is, ruling over everybody as a tyrant. And all the people are down there, all the men are down there wanting to come and kill the monkey tyrant because he's threatening their families and all the rest of that. And so the men every so often get up the courage to go attack the monkey, and they run up to the monkey, and just before they get to the monkey goes, oh, ah, like that with his magic power, and all the guys have to fall back on the ground, pow, knocked out by the monkey's power. And then they get up again, and get up their courage, and they charge the monkey again and go, pow, he finally, knocks them out. Like again, they have to fall back. And so I think at the end, they finally overwhelm the monkey king and kill him. All right. And that would be a great thing to do with batakas, batakas. Pound that monkey king with the batakas. Everybody gets to pound him, and it doesn't hurt him because those foam sausages just bounce back off, hit him, and it bounces off, and it doesn't hurt him. But anyway, so that's another way that you could use emotional theater. Another one would be the Maori haka dance, when they're going to go into warfare and they stand opposite each other, and jump up and down and shout at each other. And if you read the anthropology about it, that's what Maori tribes would do before they would fight a battle. Again, because this was a hand-to-hand battle, and they'd have these big wooden clubs that could really kill you. They were sort of like cricket mallets, cricket bats, and they could really kill you with those big flat pieces of heavy wood. So it was going to be hand-to-hand combat, and so they would try and psych out the enemy by doing these haka dances beforehand. And when they wanted to really show how unafraid of their enemy they were, they would strip naked and do this haka dance and get erections to show their enemy how unafraid of them they were. Haha, look at my dick, standing here straight. That's how unafraid of you I am. So anyway, we wouldn't necessarily have to include that in our haka dances, although it would be fun. Yeah, but the haka dances are, would be one. But another way would be pretending to be a lion and just roaring. And really do that. So there are lots of ways that we could do emotional catharsis. And the final emotional catharsis thing I did was accidentally. I was hitchhiking home. It was Christmas night, okay, the night of Christmas Day, after Christmas Day. All my family had been out of town. I'd been on a long hitchhiking trip up to Northern California in the middle of the winter, froze my butt off, looking for a commune to join, and got there, found they were just crazy people, and came back home to find that neither my mother nor my brother was in town. My mom had gone off to Mexico or something, I don't know, for the Christmas vacations, and I don't know where my brother was. He may have been in France that year, on a college year in Europe, I don't know. Anyway, I was all alone, so I spent Christmas Day all alone, down at the beach, met a few people, talked with them, kind of hippies and wanderers like myself. And then finally at the end of the day, thought, God, where am I going to spend the night? And I knew my family had this, because my mom's apartment was all locked up, I couldn't go there. And I knew that my family had this cabin on the other side of the mountains, inland, and I could get up there and go into the cabin. I knew where the key was, and I could get in and stay there. So it was getting dark, and I hitchhiked up there in the dark. And as I was hitchhiking over the mountains and down to the other side, I got to talking, an intense debate with the guy who was giving me a ride. We were both young, we were both sort of radicals, and he was more of a Quaker and a pacifist, and saying that, violence against the system is not going to bring about the result that we want. And he was right. I was, on the other hand, a little more radical at that time, and I wasn't in favor of violence against persons, except for Richard Nixon. I think it would have been good to kill him, just try and stop the Vietnam War. Now, I'm not making a threat against Richard Nixon. He's been dead for many years, but at the time, I thought it would be good to kill Richard Nixon, go on trial, and explain to the American people how wrong the Vietnam War was, and that's why I had killed the president. But anyway, that didn't happen, and I never told anybody about that. So I'm riding across the pass with this guy, and he's arguing for complete pacifism, and I'm arguing that, well, there are people dying in Vietnam, thousands and thousands of people, innocent people, dying over there, and violence against property here to try and show the government how strongly we feel about this is justified. And we were arguing back and forth so intensely that I suddenly realized I'd missed my turnoff. I was supposed to get out at a certain point, and the road goes down that way, and the cabin is a couple miles off in that direction. I was just going to walk from there. But I'd gone way past it, and I was now 10 miles past the turnoff. And when I realized that, and so he let me out. We'd been arguing so much he wasn't about to turn around and take me back to where I wanted to go, so I was on my own. So I went over to the side of the highway there, and it's the only highway. It was one of the two highways that goes through that area. It's the only one that goes over the mountains. The other way is a long way around. You have to go by the coast. But this is the straight route up and over across the mountains, and everybody was coming home from Christmas Day. And there was a line of traffic. I'm standing off by the side of the road. There are no lights out there. It's completely dark. So they can't even see me until it's too late to stop practically. But I was there at least at a turnoff where they could have stopped. So I was standing there with my thumb out, in my backpack and waiting for a ride. And a constant stream of traffic was going by me. And nobody was stopping at all. They were just going by, and I'm out there in the middle of the dark, in the middle of nowhere. And, I can't remember. I'm not sure if I even had a sleeping bag. Yeah, I think I had a sleeping bag. But anyway, I wasn't well equipped for sleeping out. I'd slept out a lot in the past, but I just really had wanted to get back to the cabin for the night and have it and stay there. And nobody was stopping for me. And I thought, why aren't they stopping for me? Well, it's because they're scared. And I thought, well, I'm just going to plead for help anyway. I'm going to plead for help. So I stood there. Instead of sticking my thumb out like that, I stood there like this. It's like, help me, please. As they went by, car after car after car. I stood there for a long time, just with my arms up. Please help me. It's Christmas night, be a good Samaritan. I'm the guy by the side of the road that the good Samaritan helps. If you're Christians, do what you're supposed to do and help me out, But everybody was too scared. And particularly when they saw me like that, they thought, well, that guy's not just stuck out here all by himself. He's also crazy, because nobody stands there with their arms out like that. So I realized eventually that was a counterproductive strategy to plead for help like that. But it just struck me how sad it was that we live in a society where everybody is so afraid of one another, that they're afraid to stop and pick me up. And when that realization hit me, it broke my heart for humanity. I just felt so sad for humanity. We're so afraid of one another that we can't help a stranger. So I kept standing there, and not only now was I holding my arms out like that, but tears were streaming down my face on both sides. I was just sobbing uncontrollably, and even that didn't work. Nobody would stop. Oh, shit. This guy's not only abandoned by the side of the road and holding out his arms like a crazy person, but there's tears running down his face. He's totally out. I'm not going to have anything to do with that guy. And that was the first time that I had cried like that, really cried. I'd been able to get angry. I'd been able to scream and pretend I was real scared and everything. And I'd done a lot of other types of emotional catharsis. But that was the first time I had been able to cry. And that you've reached good emotional catharsis and you've really broken down your emotional inhibitions when you can cry uncontrollably and just let it go and let it out. So I did that for a long time. Had a great cry there, and finally gave it up and stuck out my thumb again. And it wasn't too long, I finally got a ride. And the guy took me all the way to the cabin. So it turned out okay. And it was a great experience. That catharsis of letting my heart break with sadness for humanity and crying for the pitiful state that we are in, all being so afraid of one another. That was great. That was real. That was the emotional cleansing that I really needed. So I had gone through all of that emotional cleansing before I did my Neo-Reichian work. It was actually a year or so later, where I was lying down on the back, kicking and pounding and so forth, and making noise. And I didn't really have a backlog of emotional stress to let out. So I was not really a good candidate or a good patient for the Reichian therapy that week. I got to do it for free because because it was a learning, it was a training seminar. And so it was, some unfortunate young guy who was unlucky enough to get me, who'd already done my emotional catharsis work. And so the kicking and pounding wasn't working, and they never could figure out what to do to get me to do any more emotional release, because I'd already done the emotional release, after which when I got back to the cabin there that night, then I stayed there for the rest of the spring, and I did yoga every morning, and pranayama, slow, deep breathing, calming breathing, and then Zen meditation and being aware of my body from head to toe, and quieting my thoughts and just listening. Actually, what I was doing was counting my breaths to see if I could count up to 10 breaths in and out without losing track. Because usually what would happen, if I was lucky, I'd get to breath 6 or 7, and I'd start to drift off into thoughts, and I'd forget whether I was on 6 or 7. And once I had reached that stage, I had to go back and start over at 0. The idea was to be able to get from 0 to 10 without losing track of which breath I was on. And this was wonderful. It taught me how to clear the thoughts from my mind for seconds at a time. And you say, well, for seconds at a time, is that such a big deal? Yes. If you can learn to clear your thoughts, even for 5 seconds or 10 seconds, that is so much more than you've been able to do for the rest of your life until then, if you've never tried to do it. And so if you can do it for 10 seconds, then you know the difference between having your mind clear of thoughts and being lost in a thought fog. So I did that Zen, I did the yoga, and I really learned how to calm down and relax. And those are the things that have to go together, is emotional catharsis, muscular relaxation exercises, cannabis, and then relaxation. The muscular relaxation exercises first to loosen up the body armor, then combine that with cannabis, and that will help bring about spontaneous catharsis, particularly if you do it with sort of theater of catharsis. And then finally, after you've done the catharsis, then people should nurture each other, should give each other sandwich hugs and massages and so forth after catharsis to help each other calm down. That physical nurturing, very important. And then, everybody does their own practice of muscle stretching and calming, yoga, pranayama, Zen meditation, learning how to basically let go of personality. Personality is a bunch of emotional tensions that we put on because we have to interact with other people. But if you look at something like a chimpanzee or an orangutan, they don't have any personality. They are just observing the world. They're not putting on a performance for the world. They're just watching what's going on and making sure everything's cool. But there's no expression on their face at all. Anyway, that's more for next time. Remember, if you would like a nice printed, detailed summary of today's talk, look at the description box below the YouTube video and click on the link there. It'll take you to Google Documents, and then up in the corner you go File, Print. And you'll have a nice, detailed, artificial intelligence generated summary of what I've been rambling on about today. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.